Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland.
Hey, what's going on out there in fantasy land? It is Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined alongside Dwayne McFarland of EstablishTheRun.com. We are the Fantasy Football Hustle. Welcome in. Boy, oh boy, it was a beautiful day out there across the nation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You got out there, got some sunshine, you're stretching your legs. Hopefully we're pulling through. We're getting past the crazy last, 8, 9, 10 weeks, however long your kids have been home, making you teach them multiplication, and we're pushing through. We're getting into summer. Summer means NFL training camp, hopefully. Training camp means fantasy football draft season. And when draft season comes around, you need to be educated. No show out there is more on the edge of fantasy draft and who to get after than the Fantasy Football Hustle. Last year, if you remember, we were on Chris Godwin. We were super early on Deontay Johnson. Dwayne's draft kit will be what you need to listen to set you apart from all the other jamokes in your league. That'll be coming up down the line this summer. But tonight we're going to break down ADP. Thank you, Darren Armani over at FantasyMojo.com. So we're going to be looking at great up-to-date ADP from the Fantasy Football Players Championship. More importantly, the Football Guys Players Championship version of it. And that's something that Dwayne has extensive background in and probably should have won, right, Dwayne, without a Zach Ertz missed reception?
Yeah, leave it to an Eagle. It was Nick Foles' fault, definitely, over Zach Ertz. But yeah, it was would have been 300,000 and it ended up being 30,000 for second place.
I was going through today.
There were like 4 to 5 targets, and it's 1.5 per reception. It's a tight end premium league. I lost by less than a point. So any just catch for no yards, anything would have done it. And then like 3 years before that, I finished 4th and 3rd in that, or was it 4th and 5th? I'm trying to remember back. So yeah, done well in that tournament, over the last 6-7 years.
So luckily, when I was out at the Kings Classic Fantasy Draft, and I just happen to have that shirt on today, but I met Darren Armani, and he, very nice guy, and hooked us up with this ADP. So again, thanks to him, real cool dude. So we're going to be pulling that up. Go over to FantasyMojo.com, set up an account. You can get really great up-to-date ADP for best ball, for high-stakes leagues, PAL. Anything you want to know is over there at FantasyMojo.com. So we're going to get into that, talk about some players that we like at ADP, guys we don't like at ADP, kind of, roster construction. That's what we do here. So, Dwayne, let's start things off. Let me pull up my little sheet here. I was so ahead of the game. I last night went out and made our show sheet, which, peek behind the curtain, folks. Dwayne and I come up with a topic. There's a lot of shows out there that they want to do show sheets and tell me everything you're going to talk about. Dwayne and I do none of that. We literally text each other and we're like, what do you want to talk about? And it's like, ADP. Cool. See you whatever day we plan on doing this. And we come out and these are the shows you've gotten for the last 3 years. Maybe we need to do more, Dwayne. Who knows? Then that'll help us out. But we did do one today. So I'll go through that with you. So, Dwayne, what I first want to start off with, I guess, is the first round is going to be dominated by running backs, okay? You're going to have those McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, Kamara. Those guys are dominating the top of the first round. We know that. At the back half of the first round, at around 112, you're starting to see, according to this ADP, Mixon, Drake, and Sanders. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's a bargain on Mixon, first and foremost. Kenyan Drake, I know, is a guy you're high on. Myles Sanders could be getting – people are scared off now with thoughts of they could bring in Carlos Hyde or Shady McCoy, and he's not a first-round pick. So let's dive into those three right off the jump.
Yeah, I mean, just one step higher. I mean, if this is the first ADP show some of you folks may be listening to, it's definitely, and we've talked about this in the past, Drake, and I've even written about this in the past, but every year is its own, right? It's not, I'm not one to just say, oh, I'm huge zero RB or I'm huge this or that. It really just depends on, how the year is shaping out. And some years are better years to have different strategies than others. But what I'll say at a high level for folks, I think if you're looking at running back in the first 2 rounds, it's by far the most hit position. So we're seeing a shift back to runner, over the last 2 to 3 years versus, in the 2 to 3 years before that, it was real heavy wide receiver up top. That got really popular. And a lot of it has to do with the talent, right, that's in the league. If you look at the league right now, we're so flush with really good runners and several that are true bell cows like McCaffrey, Barkley, Elliott, so those guys are up at the top, for a reason. But if you look at the first 2 rounds, I'm counting right now, I think it's 14 runners, right?
Wow.
And then you have 6 receivers, 1 quarterback, which is Lamar Jackson. And in this tight end premium scoring format, which changes things, you have Kelsey going in the first round on average, round 1, pick 8. And then you have Kittle going in round 2, pick 6. So typically you might see 1 tight end go in those first 2 rounds, and it's usually in the second round in a non, tight end premium scoring format. So, I mean, that does dictate it a little bit, but the running backs, to your point, those are that's the hot commodity, right, in the first 2 rounds. So, and back to your question, just looking at, when you get to the end of that round, for me with Myles Sanders, like, we talked about him a lot last year. There were some things we saw him struggle with, on film. Ultimately, though, he came through on the volume, that he got, and he's part of a decent offense. And last year, that offense was just on its last legs at the end of the season. So you have to think the offense is going to be better. But I do think of the players you're drafting right now down at that position, he's probably the most fragile because I think he's the one that's most likely to have competition or have someone added, right, before training camp gets here.
Absolutely.
We also know that Doug Peterson, friend of the show, not by being on, just by being talked about a lot, because Drake's a huge Eagles fan. He could be a friend of the show, though. He would like the fantasy football hustle, but
I'll see if I can get him on.
Yeah, he traditionally is always used 2 to 3 backs. So again, coaches can change on a dime, but he does have a long history of that, and he hasn't proven to want to do something different than that. Now, last year when they drafted Myles Sanders, they talked about him being a 3-down back, and they envisioned a role for him that would be more than a complimentary kind of guy. But we'll have to see. It depends on who gets added too, Drake. I mean, if it's Devonta Freeman, that's kind of concerning because I think Freeman, when healthy, is definitely, he's still a good runner, right? And he could be somebody that could definitely challenge for some touches. Carlos Hyde, he's I think the other day somebody on Twitter beat me to it and said he's the new Frank Gore, right? And that's really what he is. So I think Myles Sanders is the one that he's probably a little too high for me right now. I get the upside. I get why some folks love him. I just don't. Here's my thought process. Why do I need to take Myles Sanders there when I could still probably take, to your point, Joe Mixon, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins even. You can throw so Adams, Hopkins, even you could throw Tyreek Hill, into that range. And I feel like those guys are all less likely, right, to be upended, right, by something new being added to the roster. Myles Sanders is a little bit more fragile. And so Sanders, I would be much more likely to take if he fell, looking at this data, the latest he's gone is round 2, pick 6. But yeah, I'd be a lot more comfortable, with Myles Sanders in that range. But you know what? I'm never taking him before I take Chris Godwin in this format. I'm just not. So, I mean, and Chris Godwin is going on average round 2, pick 7. I mean, round 2 right now, it's like, Chris Godwin, when I look at where he's sitting, I mean, I want him over everyone, including some of these other guys like Myles Sanders. I also would rather have Chris Godwin than Kenyan Drake. I like Kenyan Drake, but Kenyan Drake is not fragile for the same reasons as Myles Sanders. I just feel like we have a limited sample size. He's a great fit in that offense. We love, what Cliff Kingsbury does, how he spreads the field out, and we see the fit. We love him as a receiver as well. I think the problem is, we still don't know when everyone else is healthy. Down the stretch last year when Kenyan Drake went nuts, everybody else was hurt. There was one game where people were kind of hurt and they just went all with Drake. But I mean, it was pretty much Drake's, it was his opportunity to have last year. Now, the plus is he did great with it, but I just don't want to invest in Kenyan Drake over Joe Mixon, over Tyreek Hill, over DeAndre Hopkins. I'm just not. Now, you could make the argument because runners go so quickly that maybe Kenyan Drake, is the wise move over a Tyreek Hill or over a DeAndre Hopkins. But for me, when I'm in the first round, I just want a guy that I feel good about. Drake. Like DeAndre Hopkins, I know he's going to take a little bit of a step back from what we were used to. I mean, I totally believe that, but I still think he's going to be a top 6, top 8 receiver. And I just know that, and I can put it in the bank. And with Kenyan Drake, I just don't. How do you feel if you have to put money down on DeAndre Hopkins being, a top 6, 8 receiver versus Kenyan Drake being a top 6 to 8, running back? So you got to bet your house on one of those two things. I think it's easy, right? You're going to say DeAndre Hopkins. That's the way you should approach the first round of your draft. There's no reason to take that risk. I would like Kenyan Drake a lot better in the second round. I'm with you on Mixon. Mixon, we got to make sure this holdout thing doesn't become a big issue. So that's going to be something to watch, especially if you're drafting early. I'm probably not going to get a ton of Mixon exposure early because I don't see him really climbing from here, even if the news gets better. I think that if something negative around Mixon occurs, that's when you're going to get your discount on him, and he's going to get pushed down into the second round. And I'll get some shares of him then because I draft so many teams. But if I was just drafting one team today and you told me I need to take one of those 3 runners, I would definitely take Mixon.
I'm a guy this year who's really high on maybe starting running back, and I've done a couple of best ball drafts already, and I've started that way. And boy, receivers just so deep, and we'll get into that as it goes on. So I actually started a draft with Sanders, and then came back, and I was at the 111, and I came back at the 2-2 with Nick Chubb. So I started my draft Sanders Chubb. I was really happy about that. I mean, there's a lot of things that could go wrong, but it's going to be viable this year. I bet in a lot of home leagues out there. Our listeners are, the average guy. They're playing with their buddies for, $100 a head. That you're going to see a lot of guys at the turn with Sanders, Chubb, Sanders, Drake. Maybe Mixon falls there. One guy that I don't want in that spot, though, Dwayne, is Josh Jacobs. Now, all they keep doing I feel like I'm John F. Kennedy here with my pointing at, or Bill Clinton, pointing my thumb at you. So I don't like anything about Josh Jacobs. I don't like the fact that his ADP says he's a very early second round pick, 2-3. I don't like the fact that they keep bringing in more people to catch balls. He only, I think, averaged 2 targets a game last year anyways. So at 2-3, I can't be investing in a guy in an offense that it's not based around him. They added a bazillion toys, the quarterback marginal at best, and he's not going to catch the football. Fantasy football to me this year is about, can your quarterback run? Can your receivers catch footballs? He's not catching footballs, so I don't want him on my team early second round.
Yeah. This is going to be my conundrum. I think early on in drafting, I've definitely got more research to do, but I don't see myself drafting Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, any of those guys over Chris Godwin. I see no way for me to do that, even though I know runners are going to be more scarce. I believe Chris Godwin easily by this time next year will be a first round draft pick. And so he's just a guy that I believe in. We've talked about him a million times. We talked about him way early last year, as soon as Bruce Arians, became the head coach. So setting that aside, though, to your point, I'm with you on Josh Jacobs. You had Lynn Bowden Jr. and you re-signed Jalen Richard to a 2-year deal. Right. John Gruden has a history, of liking these pass catching backs that he likes to pair. Think all the way back to the Raiders, back when he had Tyrone Wheatley and was it Charlie Garner?
Former Eagle.
Remember
Charlie
that?
Garner.
Yeah. I mean, so this is something that goes back a long way. And if you go and look at John Gruden, has he ever had years with true bell cow? Maybe 1 or 2. It was the second year, I believe, for Cadillac Williams, or it may have been his rookie year. He rode Cadillac Williams basically into the ground 1 year. But with these signings, I'm with you. I don't see Josh Jacobs, taking on more of a receiving role. And he's in an offense that we are going to have to project a lot into to see a bunch of upside in it. Because really, if you think about it, these are just a bunch of young guys. Henry Ruggs is a rookie. Edwards is a rookie. Tyrell Williams didn't really do much last year. Derek Carr's never impressed us. The best player on their offense might be Josh Jacobs or Darren Waller. And I still think Darren Waller is elite, with what he does as a mismatch. But to your point, I just don't, it's something where if you're taking a guy like Jacobs in the second round, you have to believe his touchdown upside is big. And I just don't think we can project, 12, 14, 10 plus touchdowns for a runner in the Raiders offense is just, where my head's at right now. And it's also opportunity costs. I mean, in the format we're talking about, 1.5 points for, per reception, I'm not going to take Josh Jacobs over George Kittle, in a tight end premium scoring format. And we already talked about, Chris Godwin. I'm not going to take him over DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not going to take him over Tyreek Hill. I'll be honest, Nick Chubb is almost a little bit in the same boat because of here's the thing with Chubb is he could lead the league in rushing,
which he was the leading rusher going into week 17 last week or last year.
He's gonna be in Stefanski's offense, which is a clone of what you've seen in San Francisco and Minnesota. It's that Kubiak Shanahan style offense. It's gonna be great for Nick Chubb, but the problem that we're gonna face is gonna be how often, Kareem Hunt, man. If Kareem Hunt hadn't been re-signed, man, Nick Chubb top 6 back. But the split with Kareem Hunt are real. Now we got a new coaching staff, but the bottom line is they did keep him. They tendered him, and it's going to be a pain in the butt for Nick Chubb owners to some extent. His floor is going to be okay, but I just don't see his ceiling, really being there. And he could be a guy that could drop down into the 25, 30 catch range as well. But I like the offense that he's in more. So I would take Nick Chubb over Josh Jacobs, but really they're probably more similar than dissimilar. And you know how much I love Nick Chubb as a runner. So that's where it gets tricky. I agree that, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Let's revisit here. We'll go a few more picks down, but we'll come back here towards the end of the show and revisit okay, where do you start feeling good about runner again? Like when you start to look at the board, it gets really scary. But I'm just trying to think through in my head. I mean, for right now where my head is at, Drake, I think in the second round, I'm taking one of DeAndre Hopkins or Chris Godwin every time that I can, because I think they have the least questions about them. And in the second round, that's still what I want. And then we could talk about what that may mean at runner, later. But my thought process is I'm probably going to try to go runner in the first round. And I'm very likely, if I can get Hopkins or Godwin, I'm going receiver, 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 because most formats I play in, I can start all three of those guys all the time.
Now, in this format, it is tight end premium, which means 1.5 points per reception. But just in general, I know taking an elite tight end can be a difference maker, even in your home league with your buddies. So in this ADP, Travis Kelce and George Kittle are the only 2 tight ends with an ADP in the first 2 rounds. Are you on board with taking a tight end that early? And let's say it's not a tight end premium league. It's just a regular old PPR. Are you going to take one of those 2 guys, or would you rather find value a hair later, maybe not even that far later with Andrews or Ertz, or are you just going to punt and say, screw it, I'll find, Ian Thomas and Irv Smith later?
It really depends, right, on the way the draft is going.
That's a second round pick. You'd have to take those guys.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, Kelsey's a first round pick. I'm not doing that. There's too many other guys I like in the first, and I don't think Kelce. I feel good enough about Kittle in the second, Ertz even in the third, or Waller in the fifth in this format, that I don't think I need to take Kelce, in the first, just because there's too many other guys I don't want to pass on. Right. So I'm willing to do it. So Kittle is probably my second option in the second round in this format after Chris Godwin. Right. Or it's probably, Godwin and Hopkins are the top 2. And then Kittle would be my, third choice out of what we're looking at. If you look towards the end of this round, what are your thoughts? We talked about Aaron Jones, in the comments, at the combine that Matthew Berry, found, and came up with from, talking with, the Packers brass, and then they back it up by drafting AJ Dillon. How good do you feel about Aaron Jones right now in the second round?
He had so many touchdowns last year, and really it was a 2-man offense, Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams. They haven't done a ton to really help those guys out, except added more to that backfield. Boy, oh boy. I think that offense wants to run the ball so much, and I'm not as worried about a rookie coming in this year because of the offseason issues, and Jones still is the man. And don't forget, Jamal Williams is still there. So
That's what I'm saying. It's Jamal Williams in play. AJ Dillon can be the third guy. Right? They're not going to, as the third guy, they don't want you to pass protect. They could have a different kind of role for you. That could be the guy stealing away some of those touchdowns. Yeah. So, I mean, you got the same problem with Aaron Jones, who I loved last year, but now I got a third back. And so I start, again, in the second round, I'm thinking which players, like if you ask me to bet my house, which ones do I feel best about, right? I feel better about DeAndre Hopkins, Chris Godwin, George Kittle, their roles and their offenses than I do about Josh Jacobs, than I do about, Austin Eckler, who I like. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is, on average, right, he's going at, the end of this round. That right there. And I love Clyde Edwards-Helaire and I love his landing spot. But man, the guys going after him, I could still get Mike Evans. I could still get, even Odell Beckham Jr. I could get DJ Moore. And don't be wrong, you're starting to get into a tier, Kenny Galladay, you're starting to get into a tier of guys where you could say, oh, you could probably find something wrong with a lot of these guys. But Mike Evans, I'm sorry. I'm going with Mike Evans over Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So give me, coming out, the way I'm looking right now is if we took Mixon, with your thought process at the end of the first, then you turn around and you're grabbing, let's say you end up with Hopkins and then, you end up with Mike Evans, something like that. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'd love way better priced down in the third, round. I just don't think he's going to be a bell cow guy, this year. And he doesn't have to be a bell cow to be worth, that pick. But again, there's just other known commodities. Mm-hmm. I feel like you're pricing too much of his upside already into the price. Now you could make an argument, man, if he is the main back, he could be the number one back in fantasy. Look at the offense he's in. That's true. He could be, but that's essentially what you're kind of starting to think if you're going to take him over a guy, like Mike Evans.
You're really playing hero ball there, trying to be so cute, so far ahead of the curve. I did that a few years ago in a draft. I took Monty Ball in the first round of a big draft because remember, this is, I don't know what, 3-4 years ago, Monty Ball was supposed to be like the guy in Denver's offense. And this is, that great run heavy QBX scheme. And I'm like, oh man, I got Monty Ball. This guy's going to be a steal. Total bust, total garbage.
And what's funny, Drake, is it's not that the thought process may not, about where he's ranked isn't necessarily wrong, because if you look at the runners that go behind him, you got Fournette, who's now got, he's got baggage anyway. And now you've got, it's funny. We talked about this, I don't know, 3 months ago. I said the bigger issue for Fournette is if they sign a receiving back like Chris Thompson, because Jay Gruden has shown a proclivity to use that type of weapon. That's exactly what happened. Now, Fournette's definitely got touchdown, an ability to score more touchdowns. I think last year he had 2 or 3. So, I mean, he's going to regress more to the mean, right? Upward towards the mean, on the touchdowns. So, I mean, he could easily score 6-7 touchdowns and still be in a similar range, but you don't want a touchdown dependent back on an offense that you have questions about. So I could see where you might like Clyde Edwards-Helaire compared to him. Melvin Gordon, as a third round running back.
I like Melvin Gordon a ton this year.
See, I don't, because Phillip Lindsay's really good.
He is, but Melvin Gordon can catch the football. This isn't some stiff out there. I mean, he's a really good back out of the backfield, and I think they're going to try to transition Lindsay to more of just kind of a change of pace guy, because he's not the guy you can give 300 carries to. He's not.
The thing is, we don't know that about Phillip Lindsay. They keep saying that, but it's not like the guy's hurt every week. He's been dinged a little, but he's as good a running back as Melvin Gordon. And he was also good in the passing game in college. I don't know why they don't use Phillip Lindsay more like that. Originally when he first came out, they thought he might be a guy that could add in the passing game. So, I mean, I have nothing against Melvin Gordon, but we're talking about an offense that's got a defensive coordinator as their head coach. We know what he wants to do. They added these other offensive weapons, right? And so really, how much is there going to be for Melvin Gordon when they're trying to feed Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that Melvin Gordon's going to have a huge role in the passing, in the running game. And for all we know, it's a 50-50 split with those two runners. it could easily still be that, because Philip Lindsay has shown that you can't shut the door on him, man. He won't let you. He just doesn't let you do that. And so Melvin Gordon, to me, he's an above average running back, but Philip Lindsay can do a lot of the same things he does. So I don't want Melvin Gordon. Jonathan Taylor, I love, but he's got pass protection problems. It's not like Marlon Mack has been terrible. Jonathan Taylor, he could win a rushing title if he's the only guy there, but he's also not shown that he can be a great receiver. So, these are the running backs you're faced with in that round. And then you got Le'Veon Bell, who's probably locked into his job, but people are just afraid that he already looks like he's 80. So I can see where people like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? And I totally get what you're saying on Gordon, as well, Drake. I think the thing is, you could start to, I think the real point I'm making, you could start to make an argument for any of these guys. And so I could see how people would put, Clyde Edwards-Helaire above some of those guys, because they may think, you know what, he's more likely to a 3-down roll or just as likely to a 3-down roll as any of those guys we said. And he's in a better offense. And so there's just more upside, right, to it. So I would say he's got a better shot at a 3-down roll than Taylor or Fournette. I think the guy that would challenge, just to your point, it would be Gordon. And Todd Gurley's in that round too. I didn't mention him because
that's the guy I was going to bring up next.
Yeah. So, you go ahead. I don't know what your thoughts are, but, jump in and give me where you're at on Gurley.
Sure. Yeah. But we'll just finish with Gordon. If you can get Gordon at his ADP of 3.6 and you can start with, say you're in the middle of the round there and you can get Delvin Cook or Elvin Kamara, you come back in that middle of the second round. Like you said, you get DeAndre Hopkins, Julio, Godwin, and then your RB2 is Gordon. I'm cool with that. But let's talk about Todd Gurley. Here's a guy who's not that far removed from being the top player in fantasy football. Switches teams to Atlanta, where now you can argue better quarterback, better offensive line, very good weapons on the outside. I'm not going to say better, but equal on the outside. Defense stinks. They're going to be in a ton of shootouts. He's going to catch a lot of balls, just like Devonta Freeman did last year. I think he had something like 56 receptions. That's where Gurley's value lies. Last year, he only caught, what did he catch? 31 balls when the prior years was 59 and 64. Yep. He doesn't have Sean McVay drawing up the plays for him, but to me, and I wrote this in our notes to you, he's either a screaming value at 3.3 at his ADP or a huge trap.
Yeah. Obviously the Rams know something, right? They got out from under it. And they took a hit to do it. So there's something with Gurley, but we didn't hear anything last year, and they rode him quite a bit down the stretch. We didn't hear of any setbacks, at least publicly. We can never be for sure. It's the NFL. Things get hidden, right? They don't want people to know. It's a disadvantage in many coaches' minds, right? To leak that, to allow that kind of information out into the public. So there's no reason to really, have it out there. But, the Rams, like we said, did move on. But I'm with you. Of all the guys we named, I think, Gurley could carry some of that injury risk, but I like Gurley over Fournette, Melvin Gordon, and Jonathan Taylor if I'm looking for a floor, right? Mm-hmm. Or even Clyde Edwards-Helaire if I'm looking for a floor. If I just want a floor player to say, you know what, I got to come away with a back. And here's what I'm going to say. The third round is the round where I'm more willing to make that play. And here's why. You're going to pass on Kenny Golladay. You're going to pass on Odell Beckham Jr. and DJ Moore, which I like those guys, but they're not Chris Godwin. They're not DeAndre Hopkins. You can turn around in the next round and you're going to get a player just as good, if not better than them. I would rank Juju Smith-Schuster ahead of all those receivers I just named. I would also probably take A.J. Brown over all of those receivers that I just named. I would probably also take Adam Thielen over, Adam Thielen would be in the same tier with those guys. So I could easily come away if I could say, I'm just going to take my medicine. I'm going to take Todd Gurley, and then I'm going to turn around and I'm going to come back and I'm going to nail receiver, again. I think that's the round right now with the way ADP is that you do it. That's the round to do it, because once you miss on Mike Evans, he goes at the top of that round. If you miss on Mike Evans, then to me, you kind of get into a situation where you're looking at your tiers and there's plenty you can still do at receiver, where that was different in the round before because I have Godwin, Hopkins at it above. Honestly, Juju Smith-Schuster will probably grade out right close to their tier. Juju is a must for me in the following round. We can talk about that in a minute when we get there. But yeah, Todd Gurley would be the one where I could easily take my medicine If I were to not do that and I just really wanted to be like aggressive, I think Odell Beckham Jr. is the play. I mean, he's, this is recency bias. Yes, he's had some injuries, but he could easily be in a better offense. I don't see the volume being quite as much, in this kind of scheme, but I think you're going to have a more efficient scheme. It's going to be set up to make him successful. And I think Odell Beckham Jr., still has elite talent left. He's just got to stay away from the soft tissue injuries. I mean, Beckham Jr. is a guy that still has the ability to be a wide receiver, a top 5, top 6 fantasy wide receiver. He's just got to stay healthy.
I think there's going to be a major bounce back in Cleveland, and it's nice because you're going to get, like you said, the recency bias. Everyone thinks, oh, Baker kind of stinks, and Baker's a guy I like on the low end. You can get him for nothing. Nick, everyone's going to know about Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and they're going to be kind of low on Beckham. Beckham's got upside to be a top 5 wide receiver. We know that. He's got the talent. There's no question at all. So he's a guy that, I'm definitely looking at and seeing if I could steal him because people are just kind of down on him. Let Odell slide. I mean, Odell Beckham was a first-round draft pick for the last few years. Big fan of OBJ. Let me ask you the question here, and this is probably more for home league stuff, Dwayne, but at the end of the second round, beginning of the third, we see our first 2 quarterbacks come off the board. And you're going to hear on every fantasy show, never take a quarterback. You don't want to touch these guys, get somebody later. I'll just ask though.
Especially not Lamar Jackson. Look, just don't take Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's got to regress. And he was great last year, but don't overpay for it. If you're going to take one of those 2 quarterbacks, take Pat Mahomes in the 3rd round. And look, if you wanted to make an argument to me of why you would do it, here's what it would sound like. Dwayne, I drafted, Ezekiel Elliott. He's a lock in the 1st. I turned around and got Chris Godwin, who I feel great. I bet my house on both those players. In the 3rd, I got to that round. I didn't want Mike Evans because I already have Chris Godwin, and I just wasn't sold on the runners. And I love the receivers in the next round, so I wanted to make sure I had just another stud player, Patrick Mahomes. I have no doubt that Mahomes will be in the top 3 quarterbacks every single year for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years. I can't say that about Lamar Jackson. So if you want to own Patrick Mahomes, go ahead. But I'm still not doing it personally, right? And it's not. We'll talk about it more as we get closer to the draft season, what that does to your roster construction and how that equals different decisions, down the line. You definitely have to give up something somewhere else. But for me, the problem I have, Drake, is I can still, if I'm talking quarterback, I could get Dak Prescott in the 7th. Is Patrick Mahomes worth a 3rd versus Dak as a 7th with his weapons? If I'm going to reach for a quarterback, I think I'm going to reach for Dak in the 7th, right? Because normally I don't take my quarterback until round 9 plus, usually 11, 12, 13, and I can live with it. And we'll talk about some of those guys later in the show that I'm going to be targeting at ADP.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys were going to be keen on Dak Prescott. His ADP right now, 7-2. Now, again, guys, ADP isn't you have to draft this guy right here. That's when he's coming off the board. That's not what we're saying. It's just a guide so you know when these folks are coming off the board. If there's someone you like and you're a Dak Prescott fan and wow, this is about where he comes off the board, you might have to grab him in the 6th round because he's going to be gone the next time he comes back to you. So just use ADP as a guide. And if you head over to fantasymojo.com, check that out. They've got a ton of great resources. It's going to really help you guys get better for the fantasy season. So now we're rolling here on the Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake, Dwayne McFarland, looking at ADP. We talked about Odell Beckham as we roll into round 3. And now you're getting into some running backs with question marks, either durability or they've added some competition. And we're talking about Le'Veon Bell. We're talking about David Johnson on a new team in Houston who, to be honest, I don't mind. I'm willing at his ADP of running back 20 off the board. I'll take a shot on David Johnson if he's my 2, maybe even my 3. I think he could return big-time value if he's healthy. Le'Veon Bell, I don't like the coach. I don't like anything about the team. Frank Gore has screwed me for years if you listen to this show. So I don't want anything to do with him. But I don't mind him. Chris Carson, there's no one else there if he's healthy around, running back 21. James Conner, another guy I think could be pretty good here in round 4. What do you think about these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any of those, so I color coded my sheet, before the show, just on if they're super red, like it's terrible value. If they're really, really, the greener they are, the better type of thing. And I actually have David Johnson, Chris Carson, and James Conner all as just, really light green, meaning they're fine where you get them. And so I'm actually fine with all those guys. The conundrum you're going to run into here is you're staring at, like, how is Juju Smith-Schuster still here? A.J. Brown has enormous, potential looking at what he did last year. Now it's a Titans offense that still can worry us, with the way that they like to run their offense. And you're going to have those games where, 4 or 5 targets is going to be all he's going to get. But I mean, he's just an electric player. He's a guy you want to get your hands on. And so you got to pass on a guy like A.J. Brown. And then you got Adam Thielen, who, just 2 years ago set the record for the most games with 100 yards, right, in a row. I mean, and as a guy that is going to be the main target on his team, and Kirk Cousins and him, they're simpatico. I mean, when they're both grooving and he's healthy, Adam Thielen, it's tough to see him have anything less than 150 targets this year. Same thing for Juju Smith-Schuster, and you're getting them in the 4th round, and Allen Robinson too. I mean, Allen Robinson, people, I think it was Lord Reeves that was, shouting out, around, Allen Robinson and how people don't realize, how many, big games, he had, or how many targets he had and where he finished last year. So, I mean, it's really, really tough for me to want to pass any of those guys. And you also got Calvin Ridley, who could be primed to take his 3rd year big step forward. he's going to have an opportunity to do that. Julio's probably still the one, but there's a chance for that thing to turn into more of a 1A, 1B thing versus a 1 and a 2. So you've got to pass a lot of other things to take those guys. But to your point, I would be fine. I think they're all great stopgaps. It is just so tough to pass those receivers for
Look
them.
at if I'm sitting there.
Imagine having to click David Johnson over Juju Smith-Schuster.
Oh, it's exactly what I was going to say, Dwayne. It would physically pain me, and maybe that's why you can't go and start with the super early tight end. And if you go running back, tight end, receiver, now you're here looking and you're like, oh God, I got to pass up Robinson, Juju, AJ Brown, Cooper Kupp, because you have to get another running back at that point.
That's why I say the 3rd round. If you want to make yourself take your running back medicine, and you're just deciding pretty much unless something crazy falls to me, I got to pick a spot to do it. It's probably the 3rd round. And you could honestly, if you like one of those guys better than Todd Gurley or Melvin Gordon, I probably can't argue with you, right? I mean, you may like one of those guys better than the guys about earlier. In my mind, right now, they're all pretty close, right, in a tier. James Conner's had the injury stuff, and yes, they added a running back, with McFarland, but that was later in the draft. But you still got Jalen Samuels. But it's a good, offensive line. It's a good scheme fit for what he does. You get Ben Roethlisberger back, James. James Conner has the talent to be a top 12, runner. So you could substitute any one of those guys for the runners we talked about in the previous round. What I'm most likely to do, Drake, and you have to read your draft, I'm going to see which one of those I can get to fall the farthest, right? And I might, you might get lucky and one of them falls down into the 5th round. So, I mean, if you look at, James Conner, I think 410's the furthest he's fallen. But Chris Carson in the last 24 drafts, and these are legit drafters. These are $350 teams. So I mean, these aren't people just doing $1 drafts or doing a mock draft. 5.4 is the latest you've seen him go. 4.10 is the latest for David Johnson. So there's a shot on a guy like Chris Carson. That he could fall further. And so you just kind of got to read your draft. But man, it's going to be really, really tough to pass one of those receivers. I never box myself in, but I'm planning on round 4 being reserved for a receiver because there's 5 guys to 6 guys I love. So I know I'm going to probably get one of them. So I'm trying to build my team kind of backwards in a way around that. I want one of those guys to be my wide receiver 2, if not my wide receiver 3.
It's going to pay off if you can go first 4 rounds, get 2 running backs, 2 receivers, just because after we get past this and you're into round 5, you're looking at, imagine your RB2, your choices are between rookie DeAndre Swift, even Devin Singletary, who's got major competition now with Zach Moss, Raheem Mostert, Cam Akers. You don't know what you're going to get out of any of these guys. Mark Ingram's there. Him and Kareem Hunt might be the best options of all of them, and they're almost 6th-round picks. But I just wanted to touch back on James Conner. Remember that 2018 season he had where he was just rolling. This is a guy who scored 13 total touchdowns. He had 71 targets. Yeah. 71 targets in 13 games. So they're getting Ben back. It's do have silly that
people the Steelers are too far discounted, especially like Juju. This is a great example of recency bias. This is silly. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where it's honestly as savvy as most fantasy owners have gotten. I can't believe that you can get Juju in the 4th round. It really blows me away. The Adam Thielen thing also surprises me. So those 2 guys, I'm going to own a ton in that range. And Devin Singletary going in round 4, pick 12, get out. I don't want anything to do with that. You got Josh Allen's going to get half the rushing touchdowns. Zach Moss is going to get the rest of them. Devin Singletary is going to be used between the 20s, and he's going to get, some receiving option, but he's going to get some receiving volume. And he did run most of the routes last year from a percentage standpoint for the backs. But the problem is Josh Allen will just take off. So Devin Singletary in the 4th round, that's a waste. That's a waste of a pick. You're just blowing it. There's only one bill worth drafting this year, and it's the guy I like the least. It's Josh Allen. But and we'll talk about him more later. But he's the guy that's definitely worth taking. As a bill.
We had a guy in our chat. We appreciate all the folks who are watching live on Periscope or on YouTube, and we encourage you to go to YouTube, search Fantasy Football Hustle, and subscribe over there. It would help us a lot. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, please give us that good review and tell a friend to tell a friend. Retweet us on Twitter. We're at FF Hustle. He's at Dwayne McFarland. I'm at Drake Fantasy. So follow along. We'll always go back and forth with you. But a guy in our chat room here, Dwayne, before we get too far down the road, wants to say he's a big fan of the show. And where do you see Cuyler Murray finishing this year? That's a guy who is right around this mark going, end of the 6th round. So is Cuyler Murray someone you're willing to pull the trigger on, or is that still too early for the unknown in the 2nd-year Cardinal?
I think it's too early. And we can talk about some of the guys later. I'm not saying it's like a deal breaker, just don't do it. But again, I start leaning, I could get Dak in the 7th, right? So I always think of opportunity cost. So it makes me look the next, player, that I would be looking at in my tier or whatever. And I think Dak, I clearly have ranked ahead of Cuyler Murray. And here's what I do like about Cuyler Murray is he does have the type of talent that would it surprise us if he was the overall QB2? No, it wouldn't. But I can also say the same thing about Dak, and I can get him around. You definitely have more rushing upside, right? With, Cuyler Murray. So it's not a pick, that I want to knock. If there was a quarterback that you really thought you wanted to reach for, I could definitely see how he starts to be in the conversation. He's typically, here's the problem. People, it's recency bias. They think back to, look what Lamar Jackson did last year. Cuyler Murray's going to do that this year. And so it's already priced in. It's already priced into his price tag, right? So you got to spend a 6th-round pick on him. Here's the way I treat quarterbacks. I wait on them, but I draft so many teams. There are certain guys like a Cuyler Murray, like a Dak that I know I want to own some shares of that I may not get a ton of. I basically put boundaries around them and say, look, if Cuyler Murray makes it into the 8th, I'm taking him. If Dak Prescott makes it into the 9th, I'm taking him. Mm-hmm. If whoever makes it in, I could have another guy. If Patrick Mahomes makes it into the 5th, for whatever, because you get in weird drafts, man. I draft enough teams,
sure.
That's going to happen. All those scenarios I just named will happen during my draft season. Now, I try to be conscientious of the fact that not everybody drafts that many teams. Some people just have 1 or 2 teams. So you can't necessarily take that approach. But that's the way I because there are certain guys that I'm just like anybody else. There's certain guys I want to own some percentage of, right? And it's like I treat it like, stocks, and there's certain stocks I like better that I want to invest in. Cuyler Murray, I want to own Dak Prescott, but I wouldn't make it a priority, to own him in the 6th round unless, we're talking about some different type of format. Obviously, we're not talking about, Superflex, because he'd be gone way before then. But if there's a certain format where, quarterbacks are getting 6, per passing, maybe they got some sort of weird bonus for rushing yards. I mean, there's always things that could put somebody like that in play, but it's just going to be tough for me to spend that pick on Cuyler Murray when I think I can get Josh Allen in the 9th round. And I don't even like Josh Allen, but he's going to put up similar type numbers, to Cuyler Murray, most likely.
Bills Mafia, send your hate
fantasy
tweets at Dwayne McFarland.
No, I just gave Josh Allen a good ranking. He sucks at football, but I like him for fantasy. Bills
That's
Mafia.
all we need. Hey, let me ask you about Calvin Ridley, a friend of the show and your boss over at Establish the Run. Evan Silva has him in his top 150 at player number 20. That is wide receiver 9. He calls him a high floor, high ceiling pick. Hooper's gone and Julio Jones is now 31. I think when he came out with it initially, it raised a lot of eyebrows, but people are going to read that. Evan influences ADP. He's a very smart guy, and you're going to see people try to take him maybe as their wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, if they go wide or running back real heavy. What are your thoughts on Ridley down there?
Ridley's another guy in that round that we just talked. He's another reason I'm not going to be taking a runner in round 4. If I miss on Juju and AJ Brown, Calvin Ridley's right there with Adam Thielen. I've got Thielen ahead of Ridley right now. I actually believe Evan does too, by like a spot or 2. I think Evan and I are real close on Juju as well, if I'm remembering correctly. And I know he loves AJ Brown. I've told him to be quiet about AJ Brown because he's ruining it for everyone. So it's a deal where Don Ridley. I mean, I'm not going to take him over Smith-Schuster. I'm not going to take him over AJ Brown, but I love him. I would love to have him in that round. I would be super pumped. The only receiver in that round I'm not super pumped about is Cooper Kupp. And it's just because I'm worried about what the tight ends are going to do to him because they work a lot of the same area of the field. And we saw, his production drop last year after Tyler Higbee really came on. So I have a little bit of a concern that Cooper Kupp, what he did early on in the season, it's going to be more of a hit and miss between him and some of those other guys. But yeah, these other receivers, Drake, it's just pretty much you're going to have to mark down round 4. You need to own one of these receivers, and you got to figure out how you want to handle round 3 and round 2, right? Round 1, you're likely taking a runner. Round 2 and 3 are where you've got to figure out if you can't get Chris Godwin or DeAndre Hopkins in the 2nd round, do you want to take a guy like Austin Eckler? Do you want to just take a shot on Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones? And those may be the right answers, right? If you can't get a guy like Godwin or Hopkins. Because let's say Drake, real quick, let's say you get your quarterback. I mean, you get your running back in the 1st round. Let's say who'd you name her? Let's say you took Kamara, right, in the middle. Right.
You're drafting in the middle.
You come back with Godwin. And then you come back in the next round and let's say you just go ahead and you take your medicine. You take, Todd Gurley. It may not feel like the best thing at the time, but then when you get to turn around, take Juju Smith-Schuster, and then the round after that, you could still have a shot at DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett, Cortland Sutton, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf. You start to see why you could make that, work, right? You could make that work. But the way I think about it, a lot of times some of these I'll really try to swing big. So let's say you went with Kamara, and for the sake of this, let's say Godwin was gone and you went with Hopkins, and so you turn around in the next round and you took Evans. And then in the next round, you took Juju. Could you imagine those receivers? But here's the problem, right? It's what you just said. Now you're staring in the next round at runner. You got Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, David puke my guts out Montgomery. Dude, I mean, there's major questions with all those guys. Those guys shouldn't be getting taken in that round. If you think about the other receivers that are still there, but if you think about, looking at the rest of the runners that are there, that's literally where we're at. So I'm going to do that some because I like to press, the limits on this stuff. And what I might do is come back in that round because I just like to take risks sometimes. And the guy I would take would probably be J.K. Dobbins, just because I love J.K. Dobbins. I love the offense he's in. Mark Ingram is up there in years. And if I hit with those three receivers and then I've got J.K. Dobbins and Alvin Kamara, I'm probably feeling really good. And then I'm also going to throw a lot of other runners at this. And guess what? I'm going to take another receiver in the following round like Terry McLaurin or T.Y. Hilton so that I know that I'm always flexing receiver. And then I'm just going to have to figure out what I'll do at runner, later. And we'll talk more about different ways people can do it based on your risk profile. Some people want to be more conservative. Some people want to be more aggressive, and that's fine. You want to have fun playing fantasy. You want to do it, the way that best fits your personality, and we'll map all that out for people, as we continue to go on. But that's just to give you an example. If you just really wanted to get aggressive, or maybe your guy is Cam Akers, here's what I will say. I'm not drafting DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, I'm not drafting those guys in that round if I already have two runners. Just because the receivers, again, that are there, DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen, Cortland Sutton, DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett, and this is what you were talking about earlier. The receivers are so deep.
It's so crazy. I'm looking at this list here. There's always a point in a draft where you just look at a round and you're like, every guy in this round sucks. Like they're all going to all going to bust. And I don't know. I'm trying to look here based on the ADP, and fifth, sixth round, I'm like,
you're still okay though in those rounds.
At receiver, you're okay. At running back, you're looking, you go, oh my God. You turn into the sixth round, and you, like we talked about Dobbins, there's Hunt, he's basically, you're just praying he catches balls or the Chubb gets hurt. There's nobody else. There's a bunch of tight ends. Ingram, who I think is overpriced at tight end 6 here at 6'2". Higbee, which he's going to be the darling of every draft publication you see out there. Hunter Henry at the end of that. So this seems to be a round where a lot of people are starting to pick up that tight end if they missed on some of the big guys. They're like, I want to take a little value here, and let me swing with Ingram. How about, Dwayne, these guys? Evan Ingram, Tyler Higbee, Hunter Henry. In that group, is there one that sticks out to you in the 6th round?
I'm fine with any of those guys. I think, Ingram it's a guy that just needs to stay healthy. He's shown that he can be a difference maker when he's on the field. Higbee is a guy that we have a limited sample size, but his yards per route ran and what he did was over like 2.5 last year down the stretch. You just don't see tight ends do that and then just really fall off and never, and not to say that this couldn't be a first time, but what Higbee did, and coming out, I remember when Sigmund Bloom and Matt Waldman were talking, and they compared Higbee to kind of a Travis Kelce type of guy that was still raw, but really played with an edge, and that it might take him a little time to break in. And now look, we see a guy we see what Tyler Higbee's doing. So I don't have an issue with Higbee. Hunter Henry, I'm a little more leery of, just because I'm a little bit leery, of the quarterback situation. I'm not a Tyrod Taylor fan at all. He doesn't do a lot for me as a quarterback. It doesn't mean he can't score some fantasy points if he needs to, but he's just not a guy that distributes the ball the way he needs to. He doesn't deliver things on time. He doesn't take the best advantage of his weapons. And then option 2, which will probably be on the field at some point early in the season, will be a rookie in Herbert. So I like Hunter Henry, but I would rather have him in the 7th round, because I can get Gronk in the 7th round. Do I feel that much better about Hunter Henry than I do Gronkowski?
He's going to shoot up. He'll be up in the 5th round.
I don't know. I don't know that he will, just because people already are so high on Godwin, right, and on Evans, and people think, well, how could Gronk have room, for really a legitimate role? And I get it. Gronk can't be the one in this offense like he used to be. He's not going to be.
Score a ton of touchdowns.
He may be Brady's boy, but Brady's never had Chris Godwin, and Brady's never had Mike Evans, versus an older Gronk. Brady's going to go to those receivers more. But I'm with you on the fact that, I don't see a huge difference in Hunter Henry versus Gronk. If Evan Ingram is healthy, I like him over Gronk. But, there's a scenario where Tyler Higbee has to share time with Gerald Everett, who was doing great at the beginning of the season last year before Higbee did good. So any one of those guys could have, warts, Drake, that you could really look at. When I look at that round again at receiver, it's like Terry McLaurin is another guy. Mm-hmm. He's going to be the number 1, right, on his team. not crazy about the quarterback situation or the offense overall, but McLaurin's going to be, the top option, on the Redskins. So
you got a bunch of ones here in the 6th round. You've got T.Y. Hilton, you got Terry McLaurin, Devontae Parker, Stephon Diggs, Deebo Samuel. Oh, let's look at this. At the wide receiver 29, some guy named AJ Green. You can get hit if AJ Green's your 4th receiver. Holy smokes! That's how you're rolling. Now, I mean, I'd love to flex AJ Green every week. I think that Bengals offense is going to be pretty good with Joe Burrow, and they've got a ton of weapons. Nobody thinks about the Bengals because they've always sucked. Mixon's elite. So wait, you got Mixon's a 1st-round talent, and now you're telling me with this new ball distributor in a better offensive scheme, we think you're not going to get a receiver until from that offense until AJ Green at 29. Tyler Boyd comes off 3 wide receivers later. That's crazy.
Yeah. The thing you have to wrap your head around as you start thinking about drafting this year, and even I'm even going through it right now, right? Just talking about it on the show is, where do you force yourself to take a runner that may have, a few issues? If Chris Godwin wasn't going in the 2nd round, I could easily make the 2nd round where I do it. But, sure. if Chris Godwin continues to go at 2-7, man, I'm going to own a lot of Chris Godwin. I'm going to be crying if Chris Godwin gets hurt in week 1. We'll put it that way. Because, I just love the guy, and I think he should have a 1st-round grade. And then you also have DeAndre Hopkins. But outside of that, I could get myself to take, despite some concerns I have about Nick Chubb, just because of position scarcity, I could get myself, on board with Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, even Aaron Jones. But I think that's where I probably draw the line. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a bit, overvalued right now. Mm-hmm. Although, you could make an argument that if those other receivers are gone, that why not take, a shot on a guy like Edwards-Helaire. And again, we're going to learn a lot more information. We're going to have a much better feel for about approximating what we think his role in the offense is going to be by the time, the season. We probably won't have as near as much data as we're used to, but we'll have a better idea of what we think his role is. But to your point, receiver just goes on and on and on and on and on. I mean, when you get to the 7th round, Keyshawn Vaughn, to me, that's starting. Now you're starting to get something priced accurately, in my opinion. I'm not like this huge Keyshawn Vaughn fan, but if I can get him in the 7th versus having to take Cam Akers in the 5th, I feel like they both probably have pretty similar chances to take over their backfield. Mm-hmm. Right? Darryl Henderson is probably going into a similar 2nd season that Ronald Jones was going into last year. And now Ronald Jones is in his 3rd season and hasn't done anything. I could make an argument that Keyshawn Vaughn has a better shot at coming out and just taking over the backfield because Rojo's had 2 chances now, right? Darryl Henderson, he's only going into his 2nd season. He wasn't used to running in his own scheme, by the way, which are the same issues that Cam Akers has, coming in. So strictly from a pricing standpoint, I think Keyshawn Vaughn is the one in the 7th round. If I needed to take a runner, I wouldn't mind taking him. The other guy I don't mind, Drake, is Darius Guice. And I know people are like, oh, well, they have 50 running backs, all of which really aren't running backs. Guice is if you go back and watch Guice, and if you look at how good he is, Guice, if he is healthy, is easily the best runner on the Redskins. Not a good team, but Adrian Peterson's on his last legs. If you look at what's the guy that was with Peyton Barber, mm-hmm. right? And then Drake, who's the receiver that they drafted? That's basically a runner. I don't know what
Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, Antonio Gibson. Too long of a day, making telephone PPE for hospitals. But if you look at the Redskins, Darius Guice, I'm sorry, he is far better than any of those other players. So if he's healthy, he's a guy that I could still see taking over 60% of that backfield. So he's a guy I'd be willing to take a shot on if I had built heavy at receiver earlier. He and Keyshawn Vaughn would both, be in play. I don't know why I can't say Keyshawn Vaughn. It's not really hard.
I know. You want to say Keyshawn Johnson so bad.
I think I do. I know. I don't know why. It definitely wasn't because of his Cowboy years.
Speaking of Darius Geis, I am just wrapping up a best ball draft with the guys over at Football Diehards. If you know Bob Harris and Mike Dempsey from their Sirius XM show, I was lucky enough to get in a draft with those guys. I had the 11th pick, like I mentioned earlier, and I started with Chubb and Sanders, and I took Darius Geis in the 6th round because I knew, partly from listening to those guys, that Bob Harris is a big Darius Geis fan. So I said, you know what? I can't risk it anymore. The running backs after that get real skanky. So I didn't want Ronald Jones or Tevin Coleman or any of those guys. So I took him there in the 6th. Still ended up with receivers of Juju, Ridley, Cooks, Emmanuel Sanders, Curtis Samuel, and Deshaun Jackson. So trust me, it doesn't hurt to reach around earlier to make sure you have a decent running back.
Yeah, and I think Geis is the guy that people just forget because of the injuries, but he was a 2nd-round pick, very talented back coming out of LSU. In fact, like if you look at Matt Waldman's 3-year rankings, which he puts out with the RSP, and you can see it in his post-draft guide if you don't already have it, I want to say, from the way he has the players ranked as far as talent, I want to say Geis is still, of all the guys drafted in the last 3 years, I want to say he's still in Matt's top 5. As far as, the guy that he scouted.
Wow.
So guys, yeah. If you stacked up on all the receivers, right, you've got to start pulling the trigger on these runners somewhere, right? And you want upside in them. And so I want some legs that have potential juice in them. And so Geis would be a guy that I would definitely look at. If you wanted to turn around, and you're looking at the next round, it gets a lot tougher, right? It's like you said, it's Ronald Jones. And I mean, Sony Michel, I don't mind, in the 8th round. I mean, we could easily see Bill Belichick go back to the old Bill Belichick football ways of, really trying to run the ball and control the game. That's where Bill Parcells, taught him that a long time ago. And then he happened to get an elite quarterback and, he changed everything, credit to him. But if he's trying to win with defense and manage games, Sony Michel could easily have a better role, than what we've seen. Sony Michel's a former 1st-round pick. You could get, Marlon Mack or Kerryon Johnson, who, those rookies are going 4 or 5 rounds ahead of them. They're both in decent situations should things break right, But, I mean, if you start looking at, like you said, Drake, Geis is kind of that last one that you're staring at. He's like the last of the Mohicans, right? He's the last one sitting there that you're like, man, I could see this guy. He's just got a bunch of old dudes and more like receivers in his way, and he could take the job over. And then I think Michelle would be the next one. Tevin Coleman's the other one, dude. Raheem Mostert. Let's go back and talk about Raheem Mostert going in the 5th round. That's nuts.
Yeah, Raheem Mostert started the year. He was like their 3rd or 4th back, and people go crazy. And I remember I sent Dwayne the text. There was a big time fantasy guy who put out. He goes, Raheem Mostert is going to be a 1st-round pick next year, and I'm like, what are you smoking? Like, there's no chance in the world.
He shouldn't be a 5th-round pick this year.
Yeah, you get Tevin Coleman. Oh, don't forget, Jerick McKinnon is still on that team and makes a ton of dough.
Yeah, give me the cheapest one, right? I'm much more. I will own Raheem Mostert 0 in a scheme where we know Shanahan knows that he can plug and play. He can ride the hot hand. Give me the one that I'll ride that hot hand, for a 10th round pick, and I'll just ride it the 3 weeks to 4 weeks in the season that I can use it. And then when Shanahan's done with it, I'm done with it. And so, I mean, that makes you lean to Coleman, or you can basically get McKinnon for free.
We're rolling into the 8th, 9th round here. And now this is maybe you want to pull the trigger on a quarterback. Russell Wilson's there in the 8th round. End of the 9th round, Josh Allen starts to come off the board. A lot of tight ends here, Dwayne. And some of them kind of scare me. Austin Hooper in a new location in Cleveland. They've got 7,000 tight ends up there. I think they're going to play some 12 more than they have in the past, and the system could help Hooper, but boy, there's a lot of mouths to feed. I don't think he's going to be a high priority for those guys. Jared Cook, fantastic season last year, coming off the board at tight end 13, followed by Noah Fant. They've got a bazillion new weapons, and I don't trust the quarterback at all. Then you get Hawkinson, who knows what he's going to be up and down. And then Dallas Goedert, who's the 2nd tight end on his own team. So if you're holding off on tight end to here, I don't know which way you're going.
Yeah, I think this is an area where it gets starts to get tough. I think Hooper will be the third option on his team, right behind Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry. It is a scheme that does a lot of things, that help tight ends a lot, creates a lot of mismatches. Hooper's not necessarily this elite athlete, though. So while I see it helping him, I don't know that, I get super, excited, about Hooper. I think you can roll with Hooper, though. If you've built your team really strong otherwise, you can roll with a guy like Hooper. You could roll with a guy like Jared Cook. Jared Cook's going to live more off of, the touchdowns and the big plays he's going to make in the Saints offense. He's never going to be mistaken to be one of the top two guys in the pecking order. It's Michael Thomas, and then Alvin Kamara. Mm-hmm. And then now you've got Emmanuel Sanders. But, it's an efficient offense. And so Cook's definitely going to, he has a shot to have his big weeks with his touchdowns. But, for me, if I'm going to get, to that point, if I take a Hooper and then I want an upside guy, you can still always circle back, Drake. You could get like an Irv Smith. It might be better for us to start talking about positions now. I don't know what your thoughts are, but you circle back, you get an Irv Smith, a Jay Sternberger in the 12th, 13th round. Those are guys that have a chance to potentially be the number 2 option in their passing games, depending on how things work out, in the preseason. So if you do land in a spot where you're having to take one of these guys, and I don't have a problem with Noah Fant, and the only reason why is, he did pretty good as a rookie. If you look by rookie standards, what Noah Fant did last year, typically guys that do that go on to have pretty good careers. So I don't mind Noah Fant. I don't have a problem with him in the 8th or 9th round, depending on how you feel about the rest of your team. And at quarterback, honestly, I'm playing chicken still at this point. I do see some potential upside with Russell Wilson that we haven't seen here in the last couple of years because of what had happened with Doug Baldwin. And, the offense, definitely went back more run heavy, but having DK Metcalf in his second year and still having a fairly young Tyler Lockett that can operate out of the slot, and they both happen to fit really well with what Russell Wilson does. Russell Wilson, he's still going to have to live on efficiency, but he's definitely got, 2 solid weapons that can help him in the deep passing game and can create mismatches for him.
If I'm in that tier of tight end, I'm just going to keep waiting, because down the board a few rounds later is Jack Doyle, who's going to be hanging out with Phil Rivers, and he's going to be super valuable for that squad. Blake Jarwin, big upside guy in Dallas with your Cowboys. And then you go down, you still have Ian Thomas later, Chris Herndon, Irv Smith, Jay Sternberger, we talked about. So that tier there in the 8th round, that's I'm not excited about any.
There's a difference. The tier in the 8th round is definitely better than all the guys we just named. As far as we can feel pretty good about
those guys aren't winning your league. You're not winning your league because you drafted Austin Hooper.
Yeah, but you also it may also be just enough to not lose your league versus some of the other guys that we're naming could be total whiffs, right? Irv Smith could be a complete whiff. Jay Sternberger could be a complete whiff. The guys I mentioned, Jack Doyle I like, but man, he's going to have, it's getting a little more crowded there as far as, the weapons. But yeah, I like the thought on Doyle. I think you could easily see Doyle fit into a similar tier to those guys that we talked about. I think that's probably a pretty legit call. But some of the other guys are definitely more upside oriented. Jonnu Smith, let's not forget, Delaney Walker's been hurt plenty. So Jonnu Smith obviously dealt with some injuries himself, but it's not like this is a guy that, hasn't had a chance to show a little bit, so I look at him as more of an upside pick. Yeah. He could end up having a really big role, and he could be as high as the number 2 guy in the pecking order. If Corey Davis is really just a bust, we know AJ Brown's going to likely be the one. We still got Adam Humphries working in, it's the same thing with TJ Hawkinson, a player that we love, great upside as a tight end, but you've already got Kenny Golladay, you've already got Marvin Jones. They're more potential whiffs, versus some of the guys we mentioned before. But I like your call on Jack Doyle. He probably belongs in that tier.
Let's move over to quarterback now, because we're in the 10th round according to this ADP, and your home league, again, it may be different. Quarterbacks go a little earlier, but now let's say we're in the 11th. Tom Brady's coming off the board at QB8. So 11th, 12th round, we're not even to QB 12. Everybody in your league doesn't even have a quarterback yet. The 12th quarterback doesn't come off the board in this ADP till the end of the 13th round, and that's Matthew Stafford. So let me list off this group of guys. Tom Brady, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Matthew Stafford. I didn't even talk about Aaron Rodgers yet going off the board as QB 13. So a lot of guys, a lot of pedigree, can throw for a lot of yards. We're not seeing a lot of mobility here. So I know that's the new wave in fantasy football is we want quarterbacks who can run. And of that group, Wentz probably gives you the most upside. But still, Ryan's going to throw for 5,000 yards and push for 40 touchdowns. Breeze is going to be up there. Stafford was QB 2 or 3 for a long time last year. Not the worst thing in the world if you're hanging out playing chicken with Dwayne.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is when Josh Allen makes it in around 10 and round 11, I'm just going to, take him. He typically goes round 9, pick 12 as of right now, but the latest he's gone is round 12, pick 5. And he hasn't even been drafted in every draft. There's been 24 of these drafts. He's only been drafted in 18 of them. So Josh Allen would be the guy that, I would be, taking late, and I would like to pair him with a more steady hand like a Matt Stafford. People forget that Matt Stafford last year, not just before he got hurt and had to leave, but before he got banged up and his production dropped some, he was second in the league in points per drop back to Lamar Jackson. Mm-hmm. And so, it was an offense that was clicking for him. Darrell Bevell's scheme seemed to be a good fit for him. He wants to push the ball down the field. He's got weapons to do that with. If a guy that we just talked about like Hawkinson takes a step forward, and now you've got 2 vertical threats in Marvin Jones as well as Galladay, and now a guy that could work the middle of the field like Hawkinson, you could argue that Stafford, we wouldn't be surprised if we looked up at the end of the year and we said, man, Matt Stafford's got one of the top 3 or 4 receiving cores in the league, right? If Hawkinson were to take a step forward. So Stafford's the guy that I'm really willing to take. And I'm fine when Matt Stafford is my starter in round 13 because I'm going to have stacked up everywhere else and I'm going to have depth everywhere else. I'm a little less excited about Aaron Rodgers, although it doesn't scare me to death. It's just because they didn't add anything, right? You're living on Devontae Adams. We're not big fans of Alan Lazard, right? So granted, the guy's going to get his chance. MVS will get another chance, but it's a game that it's a team that wants to live through the ground game, want to take some big shots down the field. But I think the best thing that could happen to the Packers is if all of a sudden their game scripts just got way nutty out of hand and Rodgers just had to throw, more that might help. But the offense was efficient last year from a passing, perspective. They based it off the run game, and you could argue that given the limited talent they have, that may have actually been the best way to do it. In 2019, it's just funny that they just decided to leave everything as is and not add another weapon for Rodgers. Daniel Jones is another one that I'm not that crazy about as a player like Josh Allen, but I don't mind living with it. His early season schedule is pretty brutal out of the gate, so I think that's going to be an issue. But then, dude, you can get Baker Mayfield in the 15th round. I can live with that. I could live easily with any one of these. I could live with Drew Brees, Baker Mayfield, even Ben Roethlisberger.
Ben Roethlisberger's coming off in the 17th round on average. QB 19. He was like QB 3 the last healthy season he had. He's got weapons.
So Josh Allen represents the last guy that has that really big rushing upside, right? Before you drop into really these more traditional old school passers. You can expect Joe Burrow. He's not a runner, but he's a young guy. Those young guys will usually give you a little bit of something. Tannehill can give you a little bit of something out of his legs. But yeah, and Wentz can, but you don't want him to because you don't want him to freaking get hurt. So that's why Allen is the guy that I'm saying, hey, if he makes it to here, I'm taking him because he's the last guy that could be like Dak or Cuyler or Mahomes, not Mahomes, but Lamar Jackson, a guy that can, and Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, guy that can give you mileage out of his legs. He's not the best NFL quarterback, but they definitely upgraded his weapons, around him. And so that's why he becomes that guy for me that I'm like sitting there saying, hey, all these things look the same except for this one. And so that's the last one. Once you get past there, I don't have any of those guys that I'm just dying to have. I'm definitely interested in Brady with the weapons that he has, because I'm intrigued to see if he still has it. And if he slips, I would love to take Tom Brady, but I'm not going to say, oh, I got to take him in the 10th because of all these other guys. Like he's the next highest ranked one after Josh Allen. I'm not going to be taking Tom Brady most likely in the 10th. I'm going to be stacking up probably on running back depth because I took so many damn receivers already.
Yeah, let's look at who's left here on the board at running back. So let's say we're in, rounds 9, 10, 11. According to the ADP at running back, yikes. I mean, Tariq Cohen's out. Jordan Howard.
So Cohen.
Jordan Howard's there.
Tariq Cohen is a great bye week filler, right? If you're really leaning on 2 runners and you drafted a bunch of receivers and then you drafted maybe an upside runner already like Darius Geis as your running back 3, and you just need something for a bye week, that's what Tariq Cohen's there for. I mean, don't be afraid to do that. I think you would Phillip Lindsay, I would be fine putting in that kind of a role just because, he's proven he can do it. If you're still in the mood for upside, I think you just can't totally write off Darryl Henderson. He's a guy that everybody loved at this time last year, and now he's got and that was with Todd Gurley in front of him. I mean, and now he goes later. So Darryl Henderson is still a big play threat. And he's a guy that could, just as easily win the starting running back job, with the Rams. It's not typically we know about running backs clearly, pretty early. I mean, the big knock on Henderson is he couldn't do anything last year. He couldn't get on the field. But in the 10th round as an upside play, if you need upside, great. Zach Moss, I won't be surprised if he outscores Devin Singletary. You can get him in the 10th round. I'm fine with Zach Moss. I know he's a violent runner. He's going to be the guy that uses more down around the goal line, and he's a pretty good pass receiver. He can pass block. If anything happens to Devin Singletary, Zach Moss is going to be stepping into a big role. He's already going to step right into the Frank Gore role, which if you remember early in the season last year, Drake, Frank Gore had quite a bit of the work, and then they went to Singletary. Who knows? We could see them want to be more physical and just outright use Zach Moss more than Devin Singletary. I don't think we can rule that out. So I would be fine with that. Chase Edmonds is a great handcuff to a guy that we talked about earlier in Kenyan Drake. The guy's only done it 1 year. And Chase Edmonds, if you remember the game or two that he got a chance to do something last year, that was, he was fine. Huge. Anthony McFarland in the 12th round, another, 12th, 13th round, another upside guy behind a runner that we know gets hurt. And I really don't think they want to use Jalen Samuels as a runner. I think they want to use him more as a pass receiver. So, those are some of the names that, they're mostly upside. We'll have to keep an eye on Devonta Freeman, where he lands, what happens there. A guy that's going to go way late. It's kind of similar to Tariq Cohen, although he's guaranteed to get hurt at some point, but he might get you through your first 4 or 5 weeks of the season if you're waiting to hit on upside somewhere else. Yes.
Chris Thompson.
Yes.
There it is.
Jay Gruden loves him. That's a guy that has started off as a top 12 running back, a couple of times, a couple of different seasons, in this offense that we're talking about. So Chris Thompson, is a guy that, definitely, could give you a little bit of mileage, and we'll talk again. This is something that we talk about, Drake, if people haven't listened to us before, we talk about guys that could kind of nurse you along until maybe some of your upside picks hit. And then there are the guys you're like, well, why am I drafting this guy if I've already got these other 3 runners? I should really be looking for upside. So we'll talk more about roster, construction, as we go. But Chris Thompson's a great example of a guy that might get you through 3 or 4 weeks while you're waiting on, say, let's say you ended up with a J.K. Dobbins, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you ended up going heavy on those receivers and you got 4 stud receivers, 1 great runner, and then you had to come back and basically throw everything you could at it. You decided to swing for the fences with Dobbins and take him early as your upside guy, and then you turned around and grabbed Geis. That makes Thompson a perfect guy to turn around and grab, right, later. There's a lot of different ways to think about it based on the way that your draft is going.
The last thing we'll talk about here, a couple of darts at wide receiver in this
if
football.
You need any. I don't know if you're going to need any this year.
But holy smokes, you want to talk about getting down the board, finding some value. Curtis Samuel, wide receiver 66, middle of the 15th round. Deshaun Jackson, if healthy, wide receiver 68, end of the 15th. Oh, wowzer!
Paris Campbell, I still like playing slot in a offense that wants to feature the slot, where he's in his second year. He's still learning the game. You've got a rookie that's going to work on the outside, and Michael Pittman, and then you've got T.Y. Hilton as the clear one. But this is an offense that's willing to spread the ball around. Yeah. So, I mean, that I'm with you. I mean, those are guys that I like, as well.
Yeah, if you guys were tuning in, you were hoping to hear our pal Jetpack Galileo, a little miscommunication between us. We'll have him on in the weeks to come over from FF Astronauts. No worries there. I was speaking to him during the show. So have no fear. Jetpack will be here. Sorry we couldn't get him on today. But we're going to be rolling all summer long. We got a lot of great guests lined up. We've got Dwayne and his draft plan, which last year was just a huge, huge show for us and kind of put us on the map. So make sure you're following us on social media at FF Hustle. I'm at Drake Fantasy. He's at Dwayne McFarland. YouTube. We're going to beat you. We're going to come to your door. We're going to punch you in the face. We'll be wearing a mask while we do it, but we want you to sign up for that YouTube channel and give us a good review on iTunes. Anything else, Dwayne, before we get out of here? You want to play us a song? Play us out?
No, man, I'm good. I'm not going to play us out.
Before we came on air, Dwayne's got his acoustic guitar in his hand, and he's just like strumming all kinds of tunes. And I'm like, this should be the show. We should just, like, hey, what do you think about this guy? He sucks, dude.
We'll work an appearance in for the guitar at some point. If people really want to hear it, we'll figure out how to work it in.
Love it. This has been the Fantasy Football Hustle. For Dwayne, I am Drake. We'll see you next time, folks. Never, ever get out hustled. We'll see you.